Hello, welcome back. This is Clayton Vance with Timeless Homes and an architectural snippet for you that kind of deals on the more kind of theoretical area. We're going to explore the difference between an apartment complex and an apartment building. And it's the merits and drawbacks of both, because if you live in an area that's experiencing high growth and has very kind of not necessarily rigid zoning laws, but zoning laws that segregate everything from everything, and so you have an R1 zone, an R2 zone, R3 zone, which has to do with how much square footage is on a particular lot, and if you can have multifamily housing or not multifamily housing. What that ends up doing is we continue to segregate all the uses and segregate housing types. Is that you segregate, in essence, socioeconomic classes into particular areas, and that is really kind of the last bastion of segregation we can legally do is economic segregation. And is that right or wrong? I don't know. You make the choice. But what I will tell you, I think, is problematic, because I've lived in both. I have experience in both of these things. Is an apartment complex, if we were to define these two things, is a bunch of apartment buildings inside of a parking lot. And so if I were to draw this, it would have an outlet, right? So here's my outlet to my street, and here's my property, and then I would have an apartment building, 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 and then maybe a park in order to give people amenities, an apartment building, and then all of this is just parking all the way around, right? And so that's what I mean. These are not buildings on a street, and that's architecture should face streets. Front doors should face streets. They should not face parking lots. That is just kind of a fundamental premise of good city design and planning. If you have buildings that are facing parking lots rather than streets, there's probably something amiss in what you're trying to accomplish and or do in your city and or town. And what I mean by an apartment building is, okay, I'm going down the street, and then I have an apartment building on the street. Chicago is known for their U-shaped apartments, and I lived in one of those in a little corner unit right there in a Chicago U-shaped apartment, and it was nice. I didn't know my neighbors. I was poor. I was young, and it was cool, right? And so across the street was a park, just like across the street is a park. But guess what? I didn't walk through a parking lot. I didn't walk through 60 feet of parking. I walked across a 35-foot street that had parking on one side. And then the parking lot was in the back. And so I entered through the back of the building. Excuse me. Also, so when I lived in New Jersey, another time in my life, I didn't have I worked in Haddonfield, New Jersey. If you've ever been to Haddonfield, Haddonfield is awesome. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful, wonderful, traditional, historic town. It's fantastic. Not to mention expensive, and I couldn't live there. There was an apartment building there that I could have gone to, but I was at a point in my career where I couldn't afford it, so I had to go live in an apartment complex like this. And I don't know how many apartments it was in Voorhees. Who lives in Voorhees out there? I mean, what kind of name is Voorhees? I probably shouldn't say that because it's probably some cool history. But anyway, I didn't know any of my neighbors there either. But the interesting thing is when I lived in this other apartment building, over here was a grocery store. Next to us was another apartment building. Next to us was another apartment building, but they all faced the street. And then down here was like a post office, and down here was a library, and then over here was all the commercial stuff, all of your like eating establishments and your bus stations and your and your L stop. and so you felt like you were really part of a neighborhood because you literally could walk to anything that you wanted, right? And so I could go back here to the grocery store. I could go right here to the post office, go right here, and I could walk to anything that I wanted. And it had the same density and or more density than this apartment complex. And not only that, but right down here on the other side of these things, as this road continued, all of a sudden you have houses. And so you start integrating and mixing different socioeconomic classes. And then the lots got bigger as you went further down, and then it reversed itself until it got to a city center again, or a neighborhood center. And those neighborhood center nodes are so critical because, but just so you know, your present city zoning, wherever you live, pretty much, except in these large cities, wouldn't even permit that type of development to occur. And that is one of the biggest issues in terms of why you hate growth in wherever you live, and why we continue to get growth patterns and systems that we do not like, is because we force people into this. We force people into apartment complexes or office complexes and office parks, which isn't really a park, and big box centers, because we have isolated everything from everything else. All the ingredients that make up the composition are isolated. Man, I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway because I do believe that it is true, is these giant apartment complexes are the capitalist equivalent of socialist architecture, because they are the exact same building, just replicated. It's a super efficient MIC apartment. And that's what all of that stuff was before, is equality of outcome, not equality of opportunity. Whereas in this environment, there is an option to upgrade just in the same neighborhood. There is no option to upgrade in this neighborhood because everything is exactly the same. And there is a diversity of everything in this particular area, a great mix of stuff. There is no diversity of anything here. And ironically, when I lived in those places, even though it was a monoculture of sorts, I still didn't know my neighbors, and it just felt weird. I still didn't feel like I was part of a community, even though I was part of this apartment community. I didn't feel like I was part of a community. And regardless of how well they mowed the lawn, how clean it was, or anything like that, there was something still really missing. And it was that organic growth pattern that comes from buildings facing streets, not parking lots, and a multiplicity of housing types within a single block. And right there is one of the primary reasons why I personally am opposed to apartment complexes. If you are living in a city that has a lot of growth, please talk to your city managers, mayors, council people, and that type of stuff who you vote for, and tell them that you should be creating zoning laws that help create apartment buildings, not apartment complexes, and very, very importantly, permit for mother-in-law apartments on detached garages on any lot that has more than, X amount of square feet, or is a quarter acre more, or half acre more, whatever you want to decide as a city and a community. And those things really should be decided at the community level, not at some national level. And then they should be owner occupied, because owner occupied, I mean that people whose name is actually on the title and deed, or one of their direct descendants. And if that's the case and it's owner occupied, then you're not going to have like 10 families move into that thing, and it won't run down, because typically the people who own it are going to try to take care of it. You know what I'm saying? And it helps people afford houses, and it helps people get a start in other scenarios. I live in a neighborhood where that's been permitted, and just some of the greatest young couples have been living in this what our neighborhood affectionately called the Love Shack, which was just this tiny little, more or less studio, one-bedroom apartment in our neighborhood and behind this house, and it gave an opportunity for young couples to get a start in the world fairly cheaply, integrated into a neighborhood that they would not have otherwise been able to afford. And so they were no longer segregated into that socioeconomic class, but could participate and gain a richer experience from a broader group of people. And that is why we need to adjust our zoning laws to accommodate for these types of scenarios. If you have any questions, just email. And if you want to talk about this, I'd love to have you. And we can talk about the issues that you've faced in your own communities, because it's really important for all of us to get on the same page regarding this thing. And this is Clayton Vance saying, see you later.